We're talking with Short Up director Ben Kalina about his new documentary. You can find out more about the film at shortupmovie.com. Were you working mostly by yourself as crew, or did you have a crew with you on most of your shoots?
Most of the shoots were myself and my cinematographer, Jen Schneider, who was part of my cadre, one of my buddies from Temple. And she's an outstanding cinematographer, and, I would roll sound a lot of times, and she would roll camera. And then for some of the shoots, we had a third person who would have been a sort of another sound and a lighting person. But it was pretty much three was the size of our crew at the biggest. Yeah.
Is there any additional challenge in working with like a small crew of, these close-knit people? And you've been working on this film for quite a long while, keeping everybody involved with the project and keeping momentum on the project going too.
Well, momentum's hard. This project for a long time, we were kind of searching around for, it took a long time for the film to evolve. It started off as one very different kind of film and then ended up being something, again, very different. But, Jen, I think, about a month before we finished it, we were just talking after she had seen the most recent version at that point, and she said, I think I'm really, I'm really seeing the film that you were talking about, all those, car rides back and forth from Long Beach Island over the years, which is like really incredibly gratifying, because I know I had been talking and talking and talking, and as a filmmaker, you can talk and talk and talk about what's in your head, but until you figured out how to capture the moments in the arc that help convey that, communicate that tangibly to a viewer, it's still just in your head. So, that was nice.
Yeah, you spoke to, I guess, how the film started out as a smaller project. When did you see the scope of the project changing, and how did you, I guess, go about working in that larger format?
Well, I guess I'm always pretty ambitious, and so even from the very beginning, I thought, well, maybe this is something more than a short. But at the time, at least, I was really trying to finish my master's thesis at Temple, so I was like, well, there's going to be a short here, and then we'll see what happens. But as I got into it, I realized that it really wasn't enough just to tell this story in a metaphorical way as I was approaching it, which was to talk about sort of surfers and surfing, and how surfers in New Jersey who go out in the winter and surf after nor'easters, because that's when the waves are, have this unique perspective on the dynamics of these coastal areas, and how beach replenishment is kind of this blunt force, Band-Aid on hemorrhage, so to speak, of erosion. And I thought, like, okay, cool, there's some metaphors here, we'll play it out. But as I got deeper into it and realized that actually sea level rise due to climate change is the real big story here, it's like the second act or third act, reversal or whatever. It became much more clear that, in order to tell that story, it had to grow bigger and it had to have higher stakes. And so that's when I started looking for those higher stakes.
Could you back up and talk a little bit about the beach replenishment thing? Because that's a project I didn't even know existed before seeing your film. Kind of interesting response to the whole problem of the shore erosion.
Sure. Yeah. Beach replenishment is really interesting to me. I think it's really, I think of it as like the maintenance of an island. It's kind of like when you go to Barrier Island, and this footage never made it into the film, but on Long Beach Island, there's a couple of amusement parks, and we did a bunch of shooting on one of them in the winter, and it was like, when everybody's gone, the island's basically abandoned, the park's closed, and they're going and just like fixing it up. They're repairing the carpets on the mini golf course. They're putting in a new surf wave pool and doing a variety of things that are the maintenance of that happen in the background. And beach replenishment is really a very similar process. It happens mostly when people aren't around, and really it's about, basically it's like a facelift for the island. And so, what they do is they dredge up sand from offshore deposits that, oddly enough, are oftentimes like old barrier islands. Dredge it up and then pipe it onto the island and then smooth it out with bulldozers and create a dune and a wide beach. And the idea is that it builds a buffer for storm surge, storm and wave protection. But it's very expensive, and it only works on the ocean side of the island. It doesn't do anything about the bayside, which is where you get real flooding.
Yeah, and like you mentioned in the film, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage doesn't quite get the job done.
Right. It's a very temporary solution to a long-term chronic problem, and the issue really, I think, is that, you know, when you use that as a solution and you give people a false sense of security and the idea that, oh, we can just keep doing this as long as we can afford this, as long as we can find sand, which are too big, you know, as long as or ifs, you know, we can do this in perpetuity. And the reality is, you know, both of those are real problems. And even if you were able to do that, with the kind of sea level rise that's anticipated, beach replenishment is simply not going to last for, you know, much longer. It's going to last for our lifetimes. You could probably keep it up, but, you know, looking out the next 75, 100 years, it's going to become untenable.
So with the restoration of the amusement park footage that you were talking about, I was kind of wondering, were there any interviews that you really adored but that didn't make it into the final movie?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot, you know, like I think most films, there's a lot that you kind of have to kill the little darlings. And one, you know, the whole sort of plot and thread around surfing, kind of a lot of that got lost. Most of that got lost. And, you know, there are some kind of funny interviews with a bunch of surfers talking about, you know, well, not funny so much. Some of them were funny, but just talking about how they were going to try to, you know, confront the Army Corps and deal with this, what they felt was like a real threat to the quality of life of the islands that they'd, you know, grown to love and moved to and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that. And yeah, I mean, there's a ton of interviews that never made it in, unfortunately. And quotes, discrete quotes.
So for those who are paying attention to this issue, what's happening now that's in worthwhile developments, I would say? What's the momentum looking like on the subject of our shores?
Well, it really depends. Right now, it's really state by state in terms of policies. Some states are much more progressive in terms of looking into the future. And those states are working, you know, you see basically like collaboration up and down from the governor's offices to the departments of environmental protection and other groups. And, you know, they're working on disaster preparedness. They're working on contingency planning, and they're working on figuring out how to start moving infrastructure back. Places like Maryland, New York to some extent, even Florida, although the governor in Florida is a major denier of, well, I think a lot of reality, but in particular climate change. So the counties are working on it. They have big county compacts. And so, I mean, you see a lot of people starting to look and say, you know what, we can see these things are a problem already. They're going to be horrible problems in the future. And so they're working on a variety of different policies. And, you know, right now you've got a huge influx of money from the Sandy money. And there's a in the film you see there's usually a cost share between the federal government, the local and state on beach replenishment. Right now it's all been waived, and the feds are spending about $2 or $3 billion on beach replenishment in New Jersey and New York, and that's more money than has ever been spent on the history of beach replenishment. And so they're basically building like the Great Sand Wall of China. And, you know, while it's important to have some protection in place there in the short term, I think the problem is it's a little bit like heroin, you know, and it's a free hit. And, you know, what's going to happen 5 years from now, 3 years from now, when a lot of these areas have seen serious reduction in those dunes and may not and cannot afford to replace them. That's the real big question. So, you know, yeah, I mean, the dealing with the long-term projections that we're looking at here is the first step. It's kind of the step out of the denial. And, yeah.
All right, so where do you hope to go from here? I mean, do you have any other projects that you currently have interest in, or are you mostly looking at short-ups, release, and screenings for the time being?
Well, I'm doing a lot of touring with the film. I'm potentially going to I'm going to North Carolina a couple times and probably Australia and some other places. Turns out the coast of Australia is a lot like the Jersey Shore, from what I understand.
Interesting.
With a lot of development, a lot of recent development, and a lot of the same kinds of shoreline geomorphology. But yeah, I have another project that I'm starting up right now, which is like deep in the research stage, but hopefully going to be shooting pretty soon, which is about something called geoengineering, which is kind of beach engineering writ large, and it's essentially how to engineer the climate of the Earth's atmosphere to cool the planet. It's kind of a sci-fi, out of this world idea, but for better or for worse, it's probably something that's going to start happening pretty soon as we sort of fly past some of these thresholds that the films like this talk about. And it's really just a crazy. It's as sort of, I don't know. It's as hubristic as anything you can possibly imagine. It's playing God with the planet, but we're gonna do it. So.
So Short Up 2 has plenty to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
So where, other than, I guess, shortupmovie.com, can people find out more about the documentary?
Sure. Well, it's on DirecTV, so if you're a DirecTV subscriber, it's on demand, and it's rebroadcast. It's going to be rebroadcast again this month. The date's on our website. It's on iTunes. It'll be on Netflix next year. You can download the DVD or download the film from our website or iTunes. And we do have screenings, and we're going to be populating the website with those as well. So